Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the ADC podcast, where I talk to people who have actually achieved something significant in their lives. And today, for our very first guest for this show, we have Terry Ryder, a mentor of mine, someone who consults our business and who we trust. And we'd love to hear more about what his origin story looks like. So, welcome, Terry. How you doing?
Doing well, Andrew. Yourself?
Yes, very well. Thanks for coming along, being our first guest for this particular podcast. Hopefully, we don't have any technical issues as we did a little bit earlier. So, hopefully, we'll have a smooth run at it. So, how have you been?
I've been well. Actually, if you want to know the truth, I've just had a week when I had some kind of virus lurgy, which was affecting my overall performance. But generally speaking, all is good. Last week I got married for only the second time in my life. And
Right, congratulations.
Thank you very much. And but in terms of what I spend a lot of my time doing, which is working in this business, it's going very well, and it's really interesting to see how well things are going and the sort of response we're getting from real estate consumers against this backdrop of incredibly negative media. It sort of feels like sensible people out there are tuning out all the media white noise and just getting on with what they plan to do with their financial lives.
Yeah, awesome. So, tell us a little bit more about the business, Terry.
Well, I started this business, which is based around a website called hotspotting.com.au in 2006, so just on 16 years ago. But it kind of evolved out of my career as a newspaper journalist, which is how I really started working life an awful long time ago. And I kind of accidentally became a real estate specialist as a journalist. I was property editor at the Courier Mail for 4 years, and then I worked at the Australian Financial Review as a property correspondent. And then I found myself getting lots of offers from the industry to do work for members of the industry. So I thought there was a possibility of a business. So I became a consultant doing research and writing reports. And so that kind of evolved into what I do now, which is a website that helps real estate consumers find the best places to buy.
Awesome. How long have you been running Hotspotting for?
Well, it's been going for 16 years. Prior to that, I was a freelance consultant and writer. Everything I've done for the past 40 or more years has basically been researching and writing about real estate around Australia. And I think this business evolved out of a feature I wrote for Money magazine, and I wrote a series of articles. Basically, how do people identify the locations that are going to be outperformers in real estate? And I wrote articles about different factors that might have an influence on locations, one location doing better than others. And while I was working on that and doing the research, it occurred to me that this is information that people would have a great deal of use for, and that I could start evolving a series of reports and services around that general theme. And out of that came this website and this business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I assume, being in business for the past 16 years, obviously you may have heard of a bunch of good news stories from your customers / clients along the way too. What would be like the common theme that you'd be getting from the individuals and families you work with?
In terms of feedback,
yeah,
like I think a lot of the feedback, most of the feedback we get is very positive, and it's probably based around the reality that a lot of Australians are attracted to the idea of property investment, but they really don't know much about it, and they don't know how to proceed with it. And I think the word I hear most often is overwhelmed. People are overwhelmed by the enormity of what they would like to do, taking on a load of debt. But the biggest enormity is that Australia's a huge country. How do we decide where and what we will buy? And they really don't know how to answer those questions. And so the services we provide help them do it, and including strategy sessions, just a 45-minute chat with people. It's incredible how someone can go from a point of being overwhelmed and confused, and 45 minutes later they've got some real clarity about what they're going to do. And it's quite a simple process. It's just that people don't know the questions they should be asking themselves to achieve the answers, which will give them some definition around what they want to do. Because most people don't understand it. Before you go out and buy property, you've got to understand what your objectives are, and then what's your strategy for achieving your objective. And a lot of people don't do that kind of self-examination first, and so they don't know how to go forward.
Yeah. So tell me, like, what kind of questions would you suggest the audience or the viewers to ask if they were to give you a buzz and have that 45-minute strategy session?
Well, about themselves, it's really, firstly, you've got to understand what your end game is. And it doesn't have to be terribly sophisticated or detailed, but, what are you trying to achieve with this? Where would you like to be in 10 or 20 years' time? Okay, and then some other questions about, okay, what sort of income do I have? What borrowing capacity do I have? What sort of risk profile do I have? And a lot of people don't even know what a risk profile is, let alone understand what theirs might be. But, how much risk are you willing to take on? Do you want to aim for safety and consistency and steadiness, or are you willing to take on a bit of risks? Because it's the old equation about risk return. If you take higher risk, you might get higher returns, but you might also end up with a bad result. So all of these things that people need to understand about themselves. And it's amazing to me how many people that I encounter don't know the answer to those questions because they haven't thought about them, because they haven't understood that before you start looking for real estate, you need to answer those questions.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because obviously there's a lot of pitfalls associated with it, and that's why a lot of people kind of fall for the trap of paralysis through analysis, right? So, so you mentioned start with the end in mind. So tell me about your end in mind. What does that look like? What's the ideal kind of point B for you in your investment portfolio, in your wealth creation journey?
Oh, look, it's a similar one to what a lot of people have. I want to be financially independent and comfortable as I get older. And I love what I do, and I don't really have any goal to retire as such. I often think that people his big goal is early retirement. Must be people who hate what they do for a living. I really enjoy what I do, so I'll never truly retire, but it's to be financially independent, to never be in a position where far too many Australians find themselves in retirement, is that they're dependent on government pensions, which are pretty meagre to support themselves. And I think it should be the goal of any Australian to invest to make sure that they can avoid that. But also, there are other goals like education of the kids, being able to travel, have a better lifestyle for yourself. But for me, it's my greatest passion is probably travel, and I want to be able to do that. As I've done a lot already, but I'd like to do a lot more. And achieving some level of financial success through property investment is one of the ways to make that happen.
Yeah, 100%. So when you say travel, like, are you looking at traveling around Australia or more around the world, or what do you, if you were to kind of choose, which one would you be aiming towards in the short term?
It's to be out there in the world traveling. I absolutely love Europe. I get drawn to it. I've never been to South America or Africa, and I feel I should go there. But I keep thinking about Europe,
Yeah, right.
and I'm hoping I'll be there again pretty soon, because COVID has prevented me from travelling in the last few years. My next trip is to New Zealand, where I originate from. There's probably a few minor traces of accent still remain, even though I've lived in Australia a lot longer than I lived in New Zealand. I've been here a long time. But a trip to New Zealand coming up shortly, and then planning a visit to Europe to see some of the places I haven't yet been. I just love the experience of travel and the history of places like Europe, and the food experience, and all of that. It's wonderful.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I bet. And that's the thing. I mean, to obviously have as that financial freedom, you need to build that portfolio basically to get you there, to get you that freedom and flexibility that everyone obviously wants. So, question for you, like as an investor, right? So, a bunch of our audience are investors, and as investors, like how would one approach building their own property portfolio? I guess the question that I have is, if you were to kind of go back in time as a young upstart kind of thing, how would you go about knowing what you know now? How would you go about building your property portfolio, Terry?
Well, the piece of advice I'd give to the 25-year-old me, in simple terms, is never ever sell. And I wish I'd understood that simple philosophy back then. But I think the way to succeed in this, and look, you don't have to have a big income, and you don't have to be in a hurry. My advice would be start young, and be well researched and planned. Have that goal and objective, but start young and just steadily create a portfolio. You don't have to be in a hurry. You don't have to earn above average incomes. Buy your first property, consolidate it. In a couple of years, you could buy another. And as you go along, you accumulate. Never ever sell. If you've got good real estate in good locations, I believe you should never ever sell it. And my first property that I bought, it was in Ipswich City in Queensland. It cost $25,000.
Wow.
The next one I bought was in Brisbane. It cost $50,000. It was a humble home, but on a hill looking up the Brisbane River to the Gateway Bridge. It cost $50,000. The land alone today was probably worth $1.5 million. And how I wish I had never sold that. But in those days, the philosophy of building a portfolio wasn't around. It was like you bought something and then you sold it and bought something better, and that's how you got ahead. And of course now, the lending environment, of course, is much different now. So you can do this. You can use the equity that you've accumulated and what you already own to help you fund the next one and the next one. And I think people don't need to be, as I say, they don't need to be in a rush. And if you start at the age of 25, by the time you're 40, you could easily, just with steady accumulation, have 6 or 8 properties and be well set up. And you'll have equity that will stand you in very good stead to move forward. I'm thinking of a mentoring client of mine who is 35. He's works as an electrician, average income. He's got a family that he supports, but he's got 8 properties. And he achieved that by buying affordable property in what might appear to be unexciting locations, but they're just good, basic bread and butter real estate. And I think that's the secret. You don't need prime. You don't need, on the edge of the CBD. You don't need waterfront. You just need bread and butter, basic real estate, what I call boring real estate. 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, brick and tile house, well located, close to schools, public transport. Something very, very simple as that, accumulated over time, can create a multi-million-dollar portfolio and the ability to retire early if that's what you want to do.
For sure. Yeah, I guess the main question that a lot of people will have is, well, how do you get started, and where would you look at acquiring a property? Because the majority of people, right, would want to buy somewhere close by because they'd want to see it, they'd want to visit it, kind of thing. What are your thoughts about that particular strategy?
Look, let go of all those ideas. That can be a huge barrier to achieving your goals. If you think that you need to buy something you can drive past and keep an eye on, as people sometimes say. Look, one of the keys to success is regarding all of Australia as your marketplace. And there's all sorts of reasons why you should buy the next property in a state that's different from where you currently own. And then you achieve geographical diversity, which is a spreading of your risk. As a very good philosophy. You don't want to end up owning 6 properties all in the one city or in the one state. Because, for example, if you own 6 properties and they're all in Sydney right now, well, the value of them may all be falling. Whereas if you've got 6 properties in 6 different locations, some of them will be in places that are still growing strongly in value, like, say, Perth and Adelaide are. So, look, I own most of what I own in terms of real estate portfolio. I've never seen, and I may never see them. There are ways that you can invest safely and sensibly using buyer's agents, using building and pest inspectors, property managers. You don't need to see it yourself to invest safely. I know that's counterintuitive to some people, but honestly, the inspections that should take place are the ones that the experts do. I could inspect a property, but I won't see what's important to see. I won't see what's underneath where the building inspector will look, or what's in the ceiling. I won't necessarily see the termite damage that's hidden. So my inspection isn't actually going to add a lot of value. I'm not going to live in it. And sometimes I know an author and a very successful property investor always had the philosophy that she felt that actually physically inspecting properties herself was actually a negative, because she would have an emotional reaction, and it might prevent her from buying something that didn't appeal to her personally, but which would have been a good investment just on the basics of location and rentability and all of that. So let go of that notion that you need to have something close by that you can keep an eye on. A good property manager is far more valuable than your ability to drive past something.
Yeah, and look, I think that's a common theme that I get for a lot of people who are doing really well in life, is they have a team around them, right? And they're happy to delegate the tasks that they don't necessarily need to do, because we've only got 24 hours in a day, right? And if you've got a family, well, you're already stretched thin already. If you've got a demanding job, it's even worse. So in the end of the day, how much time have you actually got to spend doing all of those things, like maintaining a house and that kind of stuff? So I really scratch my head every time I talk to someone who's looking to do it all, because doing it all creates a lot of stress in their personal lives, and they don't really realize until things break apart, right? So yeah.
Look, it's the worst kind of false economy, I think. Look, build your team before you build your portfolio is one of the sort of basic catch cries that I like to give to people. You've got to be willing to spend money on good advice and good information to be successful. You've got to treat property investment as a business. And as any business person knows, to be successful in business, you've got to spend money to make money. And property investment should be no different. You've got to be willing to spend money on a good accountant, use buyer's agents, use their expertise and the reality that they can save you a lot of time. Be willing to pay for good research. It's false economy not to do so. And I find that most investors I talk to, they're trying to do it on the cheap, and it's not smart to do it that way.
Yeah, that's it. Well, the problem is with a lot of the investors, they tend to think all properties are created equal, and all buy prices are efficient, and whatever the number is on the realestate.com listing or the domain listing is the right number, and they don't really have much more than a surface layer worth of research behind their process, which can become very lucky for some, but very unlucky for most, unfortunately. And unfortunately, the way in which the property market is built up here in Australia, obviously the government's providing a lot of backing to our industry. If you hold it for long enough, it'll typically fix the problem itself. Because I've got a client who bought well and truly above the median price about 7 years ago, and because of the recent property boom, like that property has increased in value tremendously. And over the past 3 years, it's been fantastic for them. But the previous 3 years before that wasn't the best, because I was scratching my head thinking, well, is it really the best property to buy at that particular price? So
Yeah.
What do you say about like the particular like tactics of actually buying a property? Are there any kind of rules of thumbs that you'd be kind of imparting to the audience about, like, how do you make sure that you're not overcapitalizing, for example?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do. You can do your own research. I mean, it's very easy to do these days with technology. I mean, for example, if you're got a particular property you want to buy, you can go to Domain, there's like a street profile, and you can it tells you all the properties that have sold in that street for the last 1 to 2 years, and you can compare values that way. There's also lots of other services where you can get an estimation of value. You can actually pay an independent value to do an independent valuation for you. It costs a fee, but it's a great reassurance that you're buying at the right price. Or you can engage an experienced, qualified, well-credentialed buyer's agent whose job it is to know local values and take their advice that what you're buying is fair market value, not you're not paying too much. And I've had so many conversations with mentoring clients and strategy session clients where they're very excited about. One of the mistakes that people make is if they're sitting in a city like Sydney or Melbourne, and they're buying somewhere like Tamworth, and the price is $320,000. They think, it's a bargain. But when you do a quick, 5 minutes of research, you find they're actually paying too much, relative to local values. But they haven't done the most basic of research, and they could have ended up, paying 20% above true market value. Because in the sort of market that we've had, with vendors getting good prices, some vendors have really tried it on. Okay, we'll ask a silly price. Somebody from Sydney might be silly enough to pay us that price. So it's not difficult. There are some very easy tools out there that make it relatively easy for people to reassure themselves that they're buying at the right price.
Yeah, great. So Domain, Street View, any other kind of, like you mentioned the tools, what kind of tools would you be, like if you were starting out, what kind of tools would you be looking to use as you kind of build your level of experience and understanding in the property game?
Look, I'd be subscribing to good information services. What we provide is we have really good reports for people, but there are others also, like Propertyology. Simon Presley, I think, is a really good analyst, a skilled analyst of real estate markets, and you can subscribe to his information service. He puts out wonderful information about growth markets and about factors that drive markets. And if you get services like that and take a bit of time every week to read some of the material, you're going to grow your knowledge. Have as many conversations as you can with qualified people, not with members of your family, not with uncles and aunties and others who might have fixed views about what works, but people with credentials, and be willing to pay for it from time to time. Don't skimp on that. It's amazing how many people are willing to spend $500,000 on a piece of real estate, but will skim on spending a few hundred or a few $1,000s on good advice or good information. It makes no sense to think that way, but a lot of people do think that way.
Now you alluded to it earlier. Like, what would be like the key factors that you'd be personally targeting if you were to invest in specific areas? What sort of makes one stand out above the rest?
Look, I've got a simple process, like a 3-step process that I sometimes suggest to people who, they start out, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, overwhelmed and not knowing how to proceed. Ask yourself some basic questions about, okay, what's my price range? How much can I afford to borrow? What kind of criteria am I looking for? High yield? Am I looking for capital growth, or a combination of those things? And you can very quickly start to whittle down the nation of Australia, thousands of choices, down to a short list that makes sense. You might say, I want a yield above 6%. Well, that eliminates a lot of places around Australia instantly. I want to buy in a location that's got a vacancy rate below 1%. Well, a lot of locations do right now, but when you apply those criteria and you start to whittle down the possibilities, and by process of elimination, you might end up with a short list of half a dozen locations. Then within that location, you will start to establish some criteria about the suburb within. You might be deciding on a large regional city, but where in that large regional city? You might say, well, I'm looking for an opportunity to add value, to maybe do a renovation. So you might be looking at some of the older suburbs that have older homes, with some character on larger blocks of land, because the older suburbs tend to have those larger blocks as opposed to the postage stamp blocks that new homes are built on these days. So that might dictate you looking in some of the older inner city areas of a regional city. So that's the second phase, and the third phase is actually at street level, the individual property itself. And that's a case mostly about what it's close to, what you want to be close to and what you don't want to be close to. So, you want to avoid being on a really busy road. You don't want to be across the road from the local cemetery, or you don't want to have a telecom signal tower in your backyard. You'd like to be with the sweet spot, according to some philosophies, is the sweet spot is the ideal location, is walking distance to the nearest school, walking distance to the nearest public transport, walking distance to the nearest shops. You don't want to be too close. Maybe 200 metres is the optimum. So you can have simple criteria like that. And then, okay, you've pinpointed a spot within a really good city that you've come to believe is a good place. It's going to show growth. And then start having a look around and see what's for sale in the area that you've chosen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit earlier as well. So more established kind of suburbs would be ideal if you're looking at a value add. What are your thoughts about the house and land packages versus buying something like that?
Look, there are strong arguments for and against. There's no, I think this is a really important thing for people to understand too. There's no one right answer to any of the questions about real estate. There's no right answer to the question, where's the best place to buy? It depends on the individual. And so the answer to the question, are you better to get a new house and land package, a new build versus an established property, depends on the individual, their philosophy. Maybe as you grow your portfolio, you can have a bit of both and see what works best for you. But in the current climate, where we have a situation where there are shortages of everything, there are long delays in getting things built and costs are escalating, I think it makes sense to go for established properties and avoid those problems. Just at the moment, although I do know people who have been very successful with, in the right climate and the right timing, investing in a new house and land package. You contract at a certain price, and by the time it's built, it's actually worth more than you actually contracted to pay. And that's a good outcome too. So, but that's a little bit harder at the moment in this era of shortages, delays, and rising costs.
Yeah, for sure. Because finance could you'd have trouble getting finance as well, especially if the valuations don't stack up too, right? Because one of the key things that I find with the newer properties is they're typically selling at a premium, and when you're selling something at a premium, well, it doesn't quite compare to the others in the suburb because it's always at the far right of basically the median. And to add value to those, you're pretty much buying something out of a box that's already at the top value, I guess, chain. And the people who get the profit out of it are typically the developers and the builders, right? So very hard to make a buck, and you got to kind of time the market perfectly to really get that specific scenario that you shared. So that's interesting. Yeah. And so out of curiosity, Terry, like what kind of mindset would you suggest someone try and work towards if they're looking to build their own investment property portfolio? Is there some kind of a resourcefulness that you need, or like how would one go about kind of being putting themselves in a position to win that game, basically? Because a lot of people just get in the way, in their minds, right? They play games in their minds.
Like, I think you need to have a philosophy of, it's a business. You're going to build a team of good, trusted advisors around you. You're going to be willing to pay for that. You've got to spend money to make money. You build your team before you build your portfolio. You have a clearer objective of what your end game is, and you have a defined strategy. And the most important thing of all is you stick to your strategy. Where I find most people come undone is they have a strategy. I'm going to do this type of property in these locations, and then they'll see a bright, shining object over there, and they'll be completely, suddenly they're talking about buying something that's completely beyond their strategy. So, and they're wasting their time, they're wasting your time. Establish your strategy, one that makes sense for you and your objectives, and stick to it. Then you can waste time. You can avoid wasting time on things that don't fit. And that's one of the most important things, because there's so many possibilities out there. But if you've got a criteria, well, I'm not going to even consider that because it's outside the price range that I've decided to buy in. I'm not going to consider that because the rental yield's too low. I've said I'm going to only buy property that yields 5.5% and above, and that doesn't. So I'm not even going to even look at it, no matter how attractive it might appear to be, etc. And so stick to your knittings. Stay with your strategy. Don't be distracted by something that seemingly attractive that pops up and wastes your time and makes you stray from your objective. Be patient. I've always found that when I've bought property that it takes longer than you might imagine it would, but you don't be in a hurry. Don't buy something just to buy something. If it doesn't tick all your boxes, say no and move on. The right property for you will show up eventually. I mean, I just recently bought a property and settled last week in a good regional centre. The first 3 properties we looked at didn't tick all the boxes, so we said no and keep looking. Eventually, after maybe 8 to 10 weeks, the right property did show up, and it's bought. But it's important to have patience, because if you lose patience, you're going to end up buying something that's less than what you really wanted, and you might regret it.
And what were those criteria that you set out for yourself to buy that next one, that one that you just settled on?
Look, it was firstly the location. I wanted to buy in this specific location, which, it was Toowoomba in Queensland. And I just think it's a fantastic place to own real estate. It ticks every box for me. The property itself, I'm not a renovator. I don't want a property with problems. I wanted something that was low maintenance, that nothing needed to be done to it. But at the same time, there are ways that you could add value very cheaply through cosmetic, a repaint, landscaping, things that didn't have to happen to make it lettable, but things that could add value over time. In a good location, in this case, walking distance to one of the major high schools, walking distance to shops, close to the centre of town, attractive, presentable property, good location, but not on a busy road, etc. All the basics. This one did tick all the boxes. And I felt that we actually bought it under market value, and because there's such a shortage of properties for rent in that location, there was a lot of people wanting to rent it. The rent was really strong, and the yield's above 6% from day one. So it's,
Fantastic.
To me, it's just great investing, and I'm sure that 5 years from now it's going to be worth who knows how much more than I paid for it, but it'll be a performer just because it's in the right spot in a growth centre.
And so obviously one of the strategies is the buy and hold game. Keep as many properties in your portfolio as possible. A very, very common question that I get asked is, well, what happens in the end? Like, what's the end game here? Like, how does it work when it comes to like debt levels, right? Is the goal trying to pay down the debt ASAP? Is it just the income from the property? Like, how does one, from your experience, how does one sort of retire from properties, from building a property portfolio?
Well, a simple equation would be something like this. You're buying properties. I think it's a really great plan to buy properties that have positive cash flow, or at least cash flow new. They pay their own way. And initially, you're not getting a lot of income. You can't live off the income initially. So, you're relatively young at this point, and you've got your career and your job. You're not reliant on the properties to actually give you income. But at some point in the future, if you're successful and you're structured and systematic, you might get to the point where you're 50 years old and you own 10 properties. At that point, you will have achieved equity because they will have grown in value. You would have paid down some part of the loan. And what you would do then perhaps is sell 2 or 3 of those properties and adjust the debt on the others to the point where they're now providing you with, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000 a week in income net of costs. And you can then, most people will be comfortable to live off that sort of income. But you achieve it by when you get to that point, okay, now I want to take action and retire early, that where you sell 2 or 3 of them and eliminate the debt on some of the others, so that you've now got substantial positive cash flow from your portfolio.
And one of the key things that the audience may have missed there is that you don't necessarily need to get rid of all of your debt. It's all about cash flow in the end of the day, right? A lot of people fall in love with this idea of getting rid of all debt, because all debt is bad, and you shouldn't have any debt in your life. But ultimately, one of the key things that I always try and let people know about is it's not necessarily about debt being bad. It's about having the cash flows to actually support the debt as well. Because what are your thoughts about having debt in a portfolio?
Look, I think one of the keys to success with this is to not be afraid of debt, and that doesn't mean you be reckless and blasé, but to move forward at some reasonable speed and to achieve your goal of building a portfolio, you need to take on debt. I think it's a good objective to pay off the mortgage on your home, as fast as you can. But I don't think it's necessary to have that philosophy for investment properties at all. The debt is what allows you to progress, to grow the portfolio, and if you selected your properties well, they will grow in value. That'll create equity, and that equity will allow you to borrow for the next and the next. And I mean, occasionally you hear bad luck stories of people who've gotten into too much debt, but mainly it's because people have been reckless about what they've bought and where they've bought it. I can't believe how silly some people have been, like buying 5 properties and they're all in mining towns in Queensland. That's just because they are caught up in the mining boom euphoria. People are sensible and buy in good, solidly. One of my criteria is that it's got to have a diverse economy. It's got to have a population of a certain size, and it's got to have strength and diversity, not just a tourism economy, not just a mining economy, or not just a farming economy. I want diversity, so that's got 5 or 6 strong industries. You buy in those sorts of locations, they will grow in value, and they may not grow 10% a year, but they'll grow steadily in value, and that will create equity, and that's where your comfort comes. And if debt becomes a problem, well, you've got equity. We always have media in this country forecasting prices are going to collapse, they're going to drop 20%. For a lot of people, the average person in Australia right now, with the value of their home and how much they owe on their home, values could fall 20%, and they'd still have equity. And that's the key thing, because we have very high levels of debt in this country, but we also have record levels of equity in our real estate assets, and that's a very comforting thing for people.
So, like, in your opinion, what are the key drivers of housing prices going down in value, do you think?
The causes of prices going down in value?
Yeah.
Look, it's actually not quite a rare thing. It's no one would ever say that real estate never drops in value. I think what it is true to say is over time real estate does rise in value. There's some recent research published by domain.com.au showing that, examining property cycles over the past, say, 30 years in Australia, that the average property boom in Australia is about 3 years, and values rise on average about 37%. The average correction that follows the boom lasts for 6 or 7 months, and prices on average drop about 3%. So there's often a correction at the end of a boom, but you never lose a substantial amount of the value that's been gained in the up cycle. But to go back to your original question, the one thing that I've observed does cause values to fall in Australia's oversupply. That's the one thing that can destroy property values. And where people have ended up with a property that's worth less than they paid or less than they owe, it's where they're bought in an area that's like a new development area. There's lots of new house and land packages being built. And Gladstone 10 years ago went through that, where developers just went mad and investors were piling in there without thinking too much about it. And we ended up with a massive oversupply of properties, and values fell and rents fell. That's the one thing to be wary of.
Yeah, for sure.
At the moment,
And
however,
yeah, sorry, mate. You go ahead.
at the moment in Australia, we have the opposite problem, however. We've got a shortage. It's, that kind of oversupply concern isn't going to be apparent anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah, and unless zoning laws changes and a lot more apartments get built out, I guess that's really one of the risks, right? Because a lot of people kind of fall for the trap of buying the apartment thinking it's the exact same thing as a house and land, a property with land content. What are your thoughts about the difference between apartments versus land in terms of returns?
Well, I mean, history shows that, as a generalisation, houses on land do show better capital growth than apartments. I believe that we're coming into an era where that paradigm's going to shift a little bit. I think it probably will always be the case that houses on land will show better capital growth. But there are always exceptions, and we've seen over the last 2 years, throughout this boom, there have been some spectacular examples of growth in apartment values in specific locations. But we're seeing a bit of a paradigm shift in that, for affordability reasons, more people are opting for apartments to achieve a home or an investment in a location that they want to be in at a price that's affordable. And that's starting to show up in some of the research that we're doing. But what we did see in the latest boom phase in the biggest cities of Australia is the value gap between apartments and houses grew to the biggest it's ever been. The difference between the median price of apartments and houses in Sydney was $500,000. And that gap grew in all the cities of Australia during this recent cycle. But I think the gap will close a little bit in the next couple of years, because more people are going to be opting for apartments because it's affordable or it's low maintenance. Older people downsizing, all sorts of reasons why an apartment might be the best choice for some people.
In drilling down a little bit deeper, because obviously not all apartments are the same. Like obviously there's big high rises with 200 apartments versus a four pack kind of thing. What would you be recommending people buy for building their investment portfolio? What kind of apartment what kind of apartment block? Right.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important, if you're going to go down the apartment route as an investment, or if you're buying a home, look for something with a point of difference. And that means not buying in a 50-story high-rise where there's 300 apartments and they're all exactly the same. There's no point of difference there. There's all sorts of different manifestations of units and apartments and townhouses. Something with a little bit of, maybe a little bit more boutique-y in nature. In one of the older suburbs, you might get an older apartment in a block of 6 or 8, and might have a little bit of Art Deco design about the building, a nice location in a good area. That kind of thing can grow in value nicely, as opposed to, a 2-bedroom apartment in a block of 300 that are just the same.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. You've got to have that character to make it a little bit more unique. And if it's all the same, well, you're subject to the fire sales that the divorces can force within the marketplace, and you certainly don't want to be caught out at the wrong time when it comes to these things too, right? Because it's a big risk if you're buying in those big complexes.
Yeah, I think so. And that's where we've seen values some of the instances where we've seen values fall in Australia, and people buying in those precincts of multiple high-rise apartment blocks where they develop oversupply. Surfers Paradise is notorious for it. Docklands in Melbourne, went through that phase, although currently, that's not the case now, but it has been in the past. So people need to be wary of that. They've got to be careful about what sort of apartment they buy and where they buy it.
Mm. Now, taking a step back and sort of looking a little bit deeper to with your story and the influences that you've had in your life, like what would be like the major books or the people who have influenced the way you think and the way you've invested throughout your journey? What would be the top three, or maybe just share one person or book that really kind of helped you move along your journey?
Yeah, gosh, so many. I generally find the greatest influence comes from reading. I think as a philosophy, I think you want to be successful in property investment or anything, you've got to be a reader. Books are great. They're entertaining, they're enjoyable, but you learn so much. And there's some great books out there about. I enjoy reading books about people who've been successful, about business stories. I read a great book recently about the culture behind Netflix and how they've grown to become a global phenomenon. Really interesting stuff. I read a great business book called The Road Less Stupid, which was an American, Keith Cunningham, writing about just simple philosophies on how to make your business better, and remembering that we're talking about real estate investment being a business. So you can gain a lot of, any good book you read, you're going to get at least one gem out of it that you can carry forward in your life with. There's one of my favourite authors is a guy called Stephen Pressfield. He actually writes historical novels, but he's also written very good non-fiction books. One called The War of Art, not the art of war, but the war of art. And it's about how to achieve success in any endeavour you take on, whether it's property investment or you want to be a writer or you want to be a musician, and some of the blockages that prevent people from being successful. So those are some of the things that come to mind. I haven't really gained a lot of keys to success out of reading real estate investment books as such. There's plenty of books out there that you could read, and everything you read, at least gives you something you can take forward. But
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for that. Now, in terms of, I guess, success, like what do you think determines success? Or what percentage of luck is there versus skill, intelligence, kind of talent, genes, right? Genetics, right? What percentage do you think you can attribute to those things to produce the kind of results that you've been able to achieve, and the successful people in your life have achieved? What kind of percentage would you attribute to those things?
yeah, look, I think it's mostly intelligence and hard work. Um, there may be a certain amount of luck involved, but the old cliche, you make your own luck, or that it's amazing how lucky hardworking people can be.
Yeah.
If you're reliant on luck for success, then I think you're going to be disappointed. But if you do work hard and apply some intelligent philosophies to what you're trying to achieve, you probably will get lucky. And real estate is actually a fairly lucky place to be. It's pretty kind. It's even kind to people who make bad decisions, as you alluded to earlier. That the market can paper over some bad decisions, but you don't want to be reliant on that for success. You want to give yourself the best chance of success, and that means doing the work, educating yourself, and buying in good locations. Gives you a much better chance of being lucky than if you just randomly buy something. which far too many people have done in the last couple of years when it felt like you could buy anywhere and get growth. There's been too much of that, I think.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, really want to thank you for your time today, Terry. It's been great to have you on this podcast. My biggest takeaway for today is basically use your property investment portfolio and look at it as a business. Right? Far too many people have this idea of using it as a vanity metric. Basically, look how successful I am. I own 3 properties. I own 4, 5, 10 properties. I'm really, really successful, right? But unfortunately, if you don't look at it as a business, you might have a bunch of lemons in your property portfolio, right? And if you're not making a profit, well, why are you doing it in the first place? Because the opportunity cost associated with holding on to these things can really add up if you don't have the right robust properties behind you. So really thankful for your time, mate. And where can the audience find you?
They can find the information they need on the hotspotting.com.au website. You can just go there and have a play around, and there's all sorts of resources there, reports that can be bought, or services and products. And we also provide services and products to real estate related businesses, as well as mum and dad investors. We can create reports for people. We can do research analysis for people. We can do strategy sessions and mentoring. Hotspotting.com.au is the place to go. And if they've got any questions, they can send me an email at ryder@hotspotting.com.au.
Awesome. Thanks very much. And any parting words to the audience before we wrap up, mate?
Look, I just want to repeat those 3 magic words that I wish I'd learned when I was 25 years old. Never, ever sell.
Beautiful.
Buy good assets and keep them, and that's the simple key to success. And the emphasis is on the word good assets.
Good on you, mate. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it. For the audience, please have a look at his website. Terry knows his stuff. We've been working for almost 8 months now, I believe, or 6 to 8 months, and he's been a gem to our business. So I hope you can find a ton of resources on his website, because I'm sure he'll provide you with the next steps you need to achieve your version of financial freedom in the very near future. Thanks very much for your time. I'll see you all very soon.